My name is Greg Lott. I'm the Director of State Initiatives for Right on Crime. Thank you for attending this panel on overcriminalization. We have an incredibly esteemed panel on this topic. Honestly, I think some of the best experts in the country on criminal justice and overcrim. And Shannon Edmonds is also here from the prosecutor's office. It's a cheap joke, yeah. No, Shannon's great. Well, without further ado, let's introduce the panel here. In the middle, Representative Matt Krause. He is a constitutional attorney, college professor of American history and government, and public speaker on America's founding fathers with Wall Builders. Also works in business development for Vista Bank. He is in his 4th term in the Texas State Legislature, and during the 85th session, he served on the Culture, Recreation, and Tourism and Land and Resource Management Committees. During time in the House, he has been recognized for his stance on limited government and fiscal responsibility. Please welcome Matt Krause. And the very esteemed Shannon Edmonds. He is the Director of Governmental Relations for the Texas District and County Attorneys Association. It is the largest statewide association of prosecutors in the nation. Upon the conclusion of each legislative session, he authors TDCAA's popular legislative update book, a comprehensive analysis of legislative changes affecting the Texas criminal justice system. It's lengthy, but I strongly recommend if you're anyone who's a staffer here, it's definitely a must-read before you come in and work on this issue. He's written articles and given presentations on the legislative process and various legal topics, including capital punishment, prosecutorial ethics, DWI law, and more. He's previously a prosecutor in Travis County from 1993 to 2000, and then he served as the Assistant General Counsel to Governor George W. Bush and as a policy advisor to Lieutenant Governor Bill Ratliff. Please welcome Shannon Edmonds. Vikrant Reddy, he is a senior fellow at the Charles Koch Institute and a previous policy analyst here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation and at Right on Crime. He also worked as a research assistant to the Cato Institute, as judicial clerk to the Honorable Gina Benavides, did I get that right? Right, good. In Texas, and as an attorney in private practice. He's a member of the State Bar of Texas and serves on the executive committee of the Criminal Law Practice Group of the Federal Society. He is also an appointee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights Texas State Advisory Committee, and he has the esteemed honor of living just a few blocks away from me up in D.C. So please welcome Vikrant Reddy. Representative Jeff Leach was supposed to be here, but he got duty called. Speaker Bonin appointed him to the State Preservation Board at probably like 8 o'clock last night. I received a text message. So they had a meeting today. There's a couple things going on at the Capitol with that. So he's not going to be able to attend, but he sends his regards and his regrets. So let's start this off. We've done panels similar on overcrim before, but it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. It could mean, criminalizing things that were not crimes back in the day. It could mean kind of the stigma of a criminal record leaving with you for while you're trying to get job applications, things like that. It could mean harsh sentences, and I think we'll cover a lot of those topics that sometimes we have not covered before. But I kind of want to go very broad here at first. Many of you may know that President Trump recently signed the First Step Act, and the First Step Act was a criminal justice reform bill that had very broad bipartisan support that looked at prison reform, then also reducing some of the harsh mandatory minimum sentences that go on at the federal level. And Representative Krause, I know that you were up in D.C. Just a few weeks ago before the Christmas break discussing the First Step Act and criminal justice in particular. And I know when I was having meetings on this, it wasn't what are other states doing on this topic, it's what is Texas doing on this topic. And Texas does lead on this when it comes to influence either in other states or at the federal government. They want to know what Texas has done. So I guess my first question is, did you know how important you were?
Yeah. Well, yes. No, I think you're right, and I think having the benefit, Texas was so visionary, and a lot of the credit goes to Brooke Rollins and Tim Dunn for seeing that this is where criminal justice reform needed to go, and Mark Levin led the way. Vikrant was a big part of that. And so when you came time for President Trump to take over and start pushing some of these criminal justice reforms, you already had a proven model in Texas. And this may surprise you, but a lot of times elected officials, politicians don't have a lot of courage, right? They don't want to try something new in case it backfires on them. They don't want to step out too far on a limb in case it's something that's not right. They like to know that something's worked before. They like to have kind of that consistency that they can look at. And so when the First Step Act was being talked about, people kept saying, well, they've been doing this in Texas for years. And because we've been doing it in Texas for years, we've been able to see how we've been able to close prisons and drop our crime rate at the same time. They're like, okay, some of these reforms are actually working and actually benefiting society. So to me, I think that's why Texas is kind of taking center stage here. Of course, also with Brooke Rollins, who headed up this foundation for the past 15 years before she went to D.C. to work right by Trump in the West Wing. I think that helped too. But having a proven record in Texas on these reforms and issues gave a lot of comfort and a lot of leeway for a lot of the other individuals to come on. And then I know our office worked with 21, 22 other offices to sign a letter of support for the First Step Act. It was very bipartisan. It was very broad within both of from the different sides of the aisle in Texas. And so I think that helped too. It's a very bipartisan issue, something everybody can take from and have a victory or have a win on. And it's really good for society as well. So again, I applaud TPPF for their visionary thinking, and I think that helped pave the way for the historic win we had right before the new year.
Yeah, thank you. And Vikrant, you work in pretty much every state. You're always on the go. How important do you think that kind of the signal from the federal government that this is something that we can get into? How is that going to, I think, resonate with conservatives across the country and kind of looking forward in the future of how this can kind of trigger more reform in states that maybe have not gone as far or have even waded in the waters of criminal justice?
Oh, it's huge. First of all, though, let me just say thank you so much for inviting me to do this today. I love coming back home to Texas. It's always a great treat. I'm happy to talk about these issues today because we have a lot to brag about. It's just like Representative Krause said, so much of what they were doing in Washington, D.C. in December as they were scrambling to get this bill passed was looking towards what happened in Texas. And to get to your question, Greg, you have hopefully a kind of virtuous cycle here where good things happen in Texas. They start making their way to other states. They get to the federal level. Because it happens at the federal level, it makes big, big news. It's all over the place. And then that prompts Texas to do even more, which prompts other states to do more, which then prompts the federal government to go further. And it's a very, very important signal. The First Step Act, if you get down to brass tacks, affects a very, very small number of people. It affects 2% of the federal prison population, and the federal prison population itself is only something like 9% of the entire prison population in the United States. So that's a small number of people who are affected. For those people and their families, it's a big deal, but it is a small number of people. That doesn't mean that the First Step Act is not a big deal. First Step Act is a big deal because even doing that little bit for that small number of people has been inconceivable in this country for 20 years, 30 years. And the fact that Congress is willing to do this in a pretty overwhelming vote, by the way, and clear leadership from the White House on this, it means that there's a new paradigm for the way we're thinking about these things in the country. And it means that there's an opportunity for lots of work to come.
That's right. Yeah, and Shannon, I kind of want to kick this to you because you've been here throughout from 05, 07. You've seen all these sessions where criminal justice reform has been a topic of discussion and implementation. For states and for Texas as well, what are kind of some of the words of caution that you'd like to provide to lawmakers and stakeholders when they start delving into these issues?
Yes, and thank you for inviting me, Greg, and for the book plug. Yeah. Having been here from before the beginning of Right on Crime's groundbreaking work, one of the things that I think Governor Perry once said is that, or got made fun of, was mangling, but he's trying to say that states are the laboratories of democracy. So we see other states, for instance, on drug issues. You see states legalizing marijuana, things like this. One of the great things is being able to sit back as a state and see other states make mistakes. And Texas did make some mistakes initially, or some false starts. But a lot of people don't remember Governor Perry had to veto a bill that was a big criminal justice reform bill before everybody kind of got on the same page on the reinvestment issue, taking funds, making them available up front for rehabilitation to save money on the back end, which was a wild success. It's been a great success. So other states have had the benefit, I think, of seeing where we succeeded and maybe where things ended up sounding good, and maybe there was a fiscal note that said this was going to save $40 million, and then 2 years later you look at it and say, oh, that didn't work at all. we have been sort of that laboratory for a lot of other places in the state. So it's great to see the feds, and just for the record, I don't ever go to DC. I refuse to go to
Smart.
DC. If my agency, if my association asked me to, I would quit. We like it here in Austin, but it's great to see other people recognize the successes that Texas has had, because in a lot of the other parts of the country, when people talk about or think about the Texas criminal justice system, it's a lot of negativity based not on fact, but on movies or things that happened 30 years ago. And the reality is we are doing it, I think we're doing it better, faster than a lot of other states are. And so you see other folks looking to us for leadership. And then the other issue with, because a lot of the, I'm going to call it low-hanging fruit, has been addressed already, you're going to see this new bipartisan criminal justice reform effort here in the state start to see some strains. Because to really shrink the prison population, you have to start letting violent and sex criminals out. That's who is in our prisons. It's not drug offenders. It's violent offenders and sex crime offenders. And so if you really want to, for instance, some groups there's a group out there called Cut 50. They want to cut prison populations by half. That means the only way you can do that is to release people convicted of the most heinous crimes. And I think that is going to be the next test for the bipartisanship of this effort, is who is willing to put forth those ideas, especially on the right, and say that that is where we should go next.
No, absolutely. Thank you. And Shannon, you touched on something that I kind of want to get into is you hear a story or there's a documentary that comes out or something like that, either sympathetic to an offender or sympathetic to a victim, and something needs to change. There needs to be a law put in, and something needs to happen, and it goes on both sides. So someone gets wrongfully convicted and they're in prison for longer than they do. We need to have a 200-page bill that solves everything, that's very ham-fisted, not always very well written. And then on the other side, you hear a heinous crime, and now we need 1,000 new laws that's criminalizing everything from what actually happened to a bunch of things that we don't want to happen. And so, Vikrant, I think you're best addressed, and we'll kick it to everyone else, but how did we kind of get to the point where we're at? When you look at kind of the explosion of the federal criminal code, the state criminal code, the local ordinances that you have to comply with, all the regulatory offenses that you have to comply with, it always wasn't like this. I mean, if you look at the first criminal statutes, there was about 30 crimes that were, considered they're penalized by potential jail time. We're up to 5,000 at the federal level. Potentially another 300,000 regulatory offenses that bureaucrats actually write into rules, and there's statutes in the government that says anything that the EPS says on this is considered a criminal offense. Sometimes it's a misdemeanor, sometimes it's a felony. Texas does not do it as bad, but we still have our issues as well with a lot of those catch-all provisions. So, Vikrant, if you can kind of take us through where we've come from, I think that'd be helpful.
Well, I think this problem started in the late 60s and the early 70s. This is a period in the United States where crime really starts to skyrocket. You can look at FBI figures. They maintain this kind of data, and crime is pretty much level. There's a slight increase throughout the 50s and 60s, a slight increase when the vets come back from World War II. But literally 1968, crime just starts to go through the roof. And it did happen, by the way. My progressive friends will tell me, oh, it's hysteria, people are overreacted. No, it really happened. And if you lived back then, you probably remember the urban crime epidemic and all this kind of stuff. So conservatives came in and they said, we're going to handle this problem if the liberals won't handle it. We're going to start locking people up. And we probably weren't locking enough people up, so they got really tough on the really violent offenders. That was probably a good thing to do. They said, well, gosh, that worked. Let's get tough on the sex offenders. That's probably a good thing to do. And they said, okay, that worked. Let's start getting tough on the drug offenders. Okay, things are getting a little iffy here. And they said, okay, now let's start getting tough on things like small misdemeanor violations. Now things are getting really dicey. And they said, now let's start getting tough on all sorts of small business violations and things like that. You have this kind of creep because people start viewing criminal law as the solution to all of these problems. Now, the thing I want to emphasize is that when they started using the criminal law a bit more and getting a bit more tough, I think it made sense, and I don't think you should criticize legislators for that. But a little bit of a good thing is fine, but sometimes a lot of that thing is not fine anymore. And I think that's probably what led to the problem that we have. And now it's very, very difficult to undo it, because anybody who comes forward in the legislature and says, well, maybe we should just get rid of some of those crimes, is going to get labeled soft on crime. And so you really got to be able to stick your neck out and have some guts and talk about that history and talk about how, we need to think of this as a pendulum. Sometimes it can swing too far, and you want to pull it back to where it needs to be.
Yeah, and Shannon, I think you call these boutique crimes. And can you kind of walk through how some of these things kind of happen? I know you've seen it a million times, and yeah.
Sure, and Greg, as you mentioned, we put out a book that catalogs all the changes after every session, and so we've been keeping track for about the past 15 years of the new laws that are created, the new crimes that are created. On average, at least for the past decade, our legislature creates 47 new crimes every 2 years. And among things that are already against the law, they enhance 25 of those punishments. So they take something that was already a crime and they make it more against the law than it already was, because we all know that's going to stop it, right? So you have this this ripple effect that adds up session after session. And in the middle of the huge crime problem that Vikrant correctly described the creation of, in the early 90s, our legislature rewrote our penal code. They stripped out a lot of things that had been in it. It was not long after a law review article even announced Texas had the best penal code in the country, because it was clear, it was concise, it was used easily understandable terms. Well, I bet if they looked at it now, they wouldn't, because you have a lot of rent-seeking behavior in criminal law just like you do in anything else. You have a theft offense. Well, okay, but some groups don't like how that deals with their particular problems. So then we're going to increase the punishment for theft of cattle. We're going to increase the punishment for theft of metal. We're going to increase the punishment. We're going to have an entirely new offense for organized retail theft, which is just theft of people who have a really good lobby, who can go to the legislature and get past enhanced penalties for what is still theft. It's all still the same act that was made verboten in the 10 Commandments, right? But we have figured out 15 different ways to parse it and redefine it. And I would be hard-pressed to be able to prove to you that any of those little boutique special interest crimes have really had that much of an impact. I also joke, and my friends in the lobby hate it when I say this, but look, they have clients who pay them to go get things done at the legislature. And as Vikrant pointed out, a lot of times they go to the criminal justice system to get that special treatment for their clients. And that should be the last step that is taken. There are numerous other things that can be done before you bring the power of the state in to try to change behavior. But all too frequently, that gets pushed to the side when someone just wants to pass a bill to do something about a problem that has been in the paper or that has been a popular cry among a particular subgroup.
And Representative Krause said you've seen it on both ends, where you're either kind of pushing back on some of the things that we're just discussing or trying to get out in front of it. There's a commission that has been going on since the 2015 legislative session that put together a commission to look at all the laws that are in the non-penal area of the Texas Code to see if they're unnecessary, duplicative, too extensive or harsh on their sentences. So can you kind of, and we'll get more into that, but can you kind of discuss that process either on the front end or the back end, kind of the challenges that you've seen as a lawmaker, kind of seeing this criminalizing of regulatory behavior?
Yeah, and first of all, I want to give Vikrant credit for us having that commission in the first place, because we had talked about that, and that was kind of your brainchild for us to do that. A lot of people may not know, but there are about 1,500 laws outside the penal code for which you can be criminally punished for in Texas. And so, as Greg said, they've had a commission in the last two interims that have looked through those laws outside the penal code to decide what you're supposed to do with them. And I think Shannon had a great point. My college basketball coach used to tell us, don't mistake activity activity for achievement. And he would always tell us that. But in the legislature, we're always very active to do something. If, as Greg said, if something hits the news, oh, we got to respond to this, or we got to respond to that. So at the end of the day, you have a new law, but it's not achieving any of your goals or your ends. And so I think that's what we tried to get on the front end for the last couple of sessions, at least some of us, when things are starting to come through the legislative process, and be like, whoa, let's rethink this. As Shannon said, do we already have 15 laws for theft on the books? Do we need to add another one? Is that going to help? So I think we've become a little bit smarter, as TPPF says, smart on crime, not soft on crime, at the front end of trying to make sure that you don't get these laws through that you have to come back and try to repeal or do later. They always say, you can't unring a bell. So once that happens, it's hard to go back and revisit that. So if we can head it off at the front end and be a little smarter about what actually makes it into legislation, I think that helps. You're always going to have something new with the rise of technology, with certain areas we've had to adjust or put in. Sometimes those where the enhancements come in, and I understand that, and sometimes that can be good. But if you're just doing something just to take home to say we did something tough on crime, that's usually not allowing us to actually achieve the criminal justice ends that we're looking to solve.
Representative Cross, Calvin Coolidge once said, it's more important to stop a bad law than it is to pass a good law.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
That should be put up kind of like the Notre Dame sign right before you all have to go into
That's
the
exactly
chambers.
right.
Don't pass anything today, please.
That's right.
Yeah.
That would be my specialty license plate if I could fit it on that.
Yeah, that's right. Play like a Coolidge today. Everybody hit.
There you go. Yeah. Let's switch gears here a little bit and discuss sentencing for a second. Texas is a state that has very little mandatory minimums for offenses. There are a few of these boutique crimes that carry, actual, jail time that's prescribed by law. There's a couple habitual offender statutes. For the most part, unlike the federal government, states like Pennsylvania, Florida, and a couple others, there's not a lot of mandatory prescribed sentences that a judge has to follow. And for the most part, it's either the discretion of the judge or the jury. And so, Shannon, can you kind of talk about, from a prosecutorial standpoint, working within that matrix and why Texas has, been successful? We're not hurting for prosecuting folks here. It doesn't seem like.
Right, and you use the term matrix, which is actually what a lot of other statements have. They have sentencing guidelines in a response to the phenomenon that Vikrant described with crime increasing. All the smartest people got together in a room and decided the model sentencing system should be a sentencing guideline system that will eliminate variations between cases and judges and courts so that everybody will be treated equally, because we're all in favor of that. And so they had this system that was created, and the feds use it, and many states adopted it, but Texas did not. Many states, so they have very narrow sentencing ranges with high minimums, but maybe not so high maximums. And cases get plugged into these matrices based on their background, the offense, whether they've cooperated, et cetera. Well, what happened through the legislative process in Congress and elsewhere is that gradually those kept going up, right? The box kept getting more and more serious. Rarely, if ever, did they go down. So now you have many states, these what a lot of people consider very harsh mandatory minimum sentences. Texas never went that way. There was a sentencing commission in this state in the early 90s that looked at it, and again, some of the smartest people in the room thought that was the way to go. I think now, 25 years later, a lot of the smartest people in the room say that was a horrible idea to do it that way, which just goes to show you the value sometimes of not acting. And we also are a very populist state. We're one of the few that still retain jury sentencing, and in which there are about a handful, a half dozen states that have jury sentencing, but the judge can overrule the jury's recommendation. Not in Texas. Those 12 people decide the punishment for that offender. And we, instead of going very narrow ranges, we adopted a system with very wide, broad punishment ranges that also allow supervision and probation with very few mandatory minimums. And the mandatory minimums we have are, if you get convicted a second time for molesting multiple children, we're gonna lock you up for good, okay? But not on your first time. Your first time, you can get supervision, right? We allow individualized sentencing based on the facts of that case. and we let the players in the system, the prosecutor, the defense lawyer, and the judge and a jury, decide what is the most just result in that individual case. Now, sometimes that does result in some disparate results between jurisdictions or even between, in the same community, between one court and another. But Texas has always focused on individualized justice rather than a more macro view. And, you know, as someone who grew up in that system, I really enjoyed it. I did not always agree with what juries did, but I always respected it. And we knew that we had our shot, and if they didn't agree with us, they had the final say, not a group of bureaucrats sitting in a room drawing a matrix deciding what should apply in every single case. And so I think our members are very much in favor, even though sentencing guidelines empower prosecutors, federal prosecutors, you know, are always being criticized for having too much power. State prosecutors aren't asking for that power. We enjoy having our members of our community and juries tell us what they think should be done because it informs how we're going to handle the next case that's similar to that. And you don't really get that in the federal system or these other states that use those guidelines.
Yeah, and you know, I work in a lot of states, and I can't tell you how many people have been. I wish we had a structure like Texas. I wish we had a structure like Texas. We do, you know, sometimes talk very negatively. Sometimes when you're talking about criminal justice, problem. But we do have one of the better, you know, schemes with that. And the crime, you've seen the bad in a lot of these states. So can you kind of discuss some of the effects that those types of sentencing schemes have had in states like, you know, Arizona, Pennsylvania, Florida, and what you've seen, and what works and what would be a more ideal rubric for those states?
Well, think through the process of how something like this works. Let's assume there's some debate in the legislature over some particular type of crime, and you want to set a mandatory minimum because you're really upset about this crime. You want to make sure that you get tough on it. So let's assume that Representative Krause says, well, I think it should be 1 year. You got to make sure anybody who does this gets locked up for 1 year. Representative Leach, if he were here, I would use him. He says, I think it ought to be 3. So you guys have a debate. 1 or 3, you compromise, you say 2 years. You put it in the statute, 2 years for this particular crime. But then somebody wants to primary you. And they show up and they say, 2 years is all well and good, but I'm tough on crime. I would double it to 4. And maybe that guy wins, but then somebody wants to primary him, and he says, 4 years is all well and good, but I'm really tough on crime. I would make it 8. And then someone else shows up and says, I'm super tough on crime. I'd make it 16. We were talking about something that reasonable people thought would be between 1 and 3 years. And that's just the way the process works, because nobody's ever going to run for election and say, I'm the guy that wants to take it back down from 8 just to 4. That's pretty hard to do. Now, we're very fortunate in Texas because that's not the kind of thing that happened here, because like Shannon said, we tried to stay away from mandatory minimum sentencing, but there are a lot of states, big states, states like Florida. Florida's the 3rd highest population in the country. A lot of people are affected by the Florida criminal justice system. It's rife with mandatory minimum sentences. So you see this kind of problem in states all over the country, and just like Greg said, many legislators say, I just wish we were a bit more like Texas, so that, you know, our criminal justice system had a bit more flexibility with these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And Representative Krause, kind of touching on that, what have you kind of seen coming up this session, either good, bad, or ugly on sentencing over crim, and kind of what are you working on? I know HB 226, the bill that's kind of implementing the recommendations from the Overcrim Commission is something that you've already filed. And if you want to touch on that or anything else that you've seen that's piqued your interest.
Yeah, we'd like to continue the work that's been done. The committee's actually done a really good job and been very thorough in going through the laws outside the penal code about what needs to be modified, repealed, moved back into the penal code. But it's also a great chance for discussion with others, because we filed that bill last session, then we had some industry folks come and tell us why it still needed to be in their particular section of the code, not moved into the penal code for various reasons. And so those open up good discussions on broader criminal justice reform efforts all over the place. In terms of what we're going to see this session, I don't know. I think one thing you're definitely going to see a debate about is marijuana decriminalization. I think that's the one I probably hear more and more on the decrim side. But I think it just continues. The mental health piece is also going to be huge, because To me, that's kind of hand in hand with the criminal justice reform movement, because if you're really trying to reform criminal justice, but you continue to incarcerate people with mental health issues, are you really getting at the aims for which criminal justice is intended for, or incarceration is intended for? So I think as we continue to have that mental health discussion, criminal justice reform is going to be hand in hand with that, and that's another area where I see we're hopefully going to make really good strides. Okay, this person did something wrong, they have to pay their debt to society, but being incarcerated is probably not going to help rehabilitate them or make them a productive citizen again. And I've been blessed to work with Prison Fellowship. They have a Faith and Justice Fellowship now with state and federal lawmakers all across the country. I'm on that. And so continue to talk about the dignity of the man and the woman inside who's being incarcerated. How do you restore that to them once they get out? And I think that goes hand in hand with the mental health issues and other criminal justice reform aspects to things. So if there's one issue, I think marijuana decrim is going to come up. As a broad picture, I think we're going to continue to make great strides in this area.
Shannon, what are you hearing that's hot in the streets this session on this?
Well, this is going to be my 10th session, and I feel a little bit like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, because you end up having the same debates session after session after session over some issues, and it seems like everybody else is different, but I'm still there. So you're going to have debates on the death penalty. You're going to have debates on should drugs be felonies or misdemeanors. You're going to have debates on a whole variety of issues that we haven't seen that haven't gotten a lot of traction in the past, and I don't know if they will. Some of the new things are, first you mentioned a willingness to reconsider how we deal with marijuana in the state, because that's a national trend. So that is likely to get farther in the process than it has in the past. Pretrial release and bail bond reform is something that is also a national move. You know, a lot of it, though, and I've had the pleasure of sitting in another panel or two. You know, this session, property tax reform and school finance are going to suck all the oxygen out of the room. Yeah. And probably most of the money, too. It would be nice if there's a little bit left over to put towards rehabilitation and treatment and mental health and things like that, because that has been proven to be successful in Texas. But whether or not legislators can have the courage to spend a penny now to save a dollar later is always an iffy bet, frankly. And unfortunately, one of the reasons why we have such a mental health problem in our state, and that, you know, the Harris County Jail is the largest mental health facility in our state, is because, quite frankly, it's cheaper for the state for those people to be there than to be in a state forensic bed, by a factor of almost 10, right? $50 a day versus $400 a day. It's simple math. And so until we can get legislators who take an interest in that, which we are increasingly seeing, it's going to be difficult to move the needle and make substantial changes in who we're seeing in the criminal justice system unless we have the means to adequately deal with them on an individual case-by-case basis, like I described earlier.
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit, and Vikrant, I kind of want to talk about the back end. So you've committed an offense, you have a criminal record, and now you are looking to get back in the job market or to apply for a loan, and hold. Criminal record, denied, thrown away. Can you kind of talk about the back end barriers that come with a criminal record and what we've seen with this explosion of so many different criminal offenses that can come in criminalizing behavior and kind of the negative consequences of that?
Yeah. I think I'm right on this statistic. 95% of all the people who enter prisons in the United States eventually come out. 95%. It's a huge number. So the central question in the criminal justice system is, what are we going to do to make sure that these people, when they come out and when they're living next door to you and me again, don't hurt us anymore? You really want to make sure that these people are in a position to be productive American citizens again, that they're making money, that they're taking care of their kids, that they're paying restitution to victims. You want to make sure that all those things are possible. So if you keep hanging restrictions on them, on what they can do for work, what they can do to make money, how getting loans, going to school, things like this. It becomes very, very cumbersome, and they may find that the only way that they can put their life back together again is to just commit another crime to try and make money. Well, then they're just going to go right back into prison, and it's a revolving door. So, one sort of thing that we have a real problem with is occupational licensing restrictions. Now, these occupational licensing restrictions don't get passed because anybody's thinking about criminal justice. Usually what's happened is that people in some particular business or profession are trying to think of some way to raise, to keep prices high. So they all get together and they say, well, nobody's allowed in our profession if X, Y, or Z. And one of the easiest things to make X, Y, or Z is if you have a criminal record. If you have a criminal record, you can't be in our profession. You're not allowed to be an electrician. You're not allowed to be a high school football referee. You're not allowed to be a florist. I'm not making that up. That's a real thing in Louisiana. All sorts of bizarre restrictions like this. And they'll claim that, we're doing this for the sake of consumer health and safety. That's not true. They're doing it because it's basically cartel behavior. So it's an interesting economic discussion, but it affects the criminal justice system because people come out from behind bars and they want to get jobs in these areas, and they find that they're restricted from entering them because they've got the record. One of the easiest examples in many places in the country is cosmetology. A lot of, you can go to school, you can get a cosmetology degree, you can start cutting hair, you can start doing nails, you can, all sorts of things. It's a valuable service. It's something that people really need. But if you're told that you're not permitted to enter that profession if you have a criminal record, you can't do it. And we've literally got hundreds of jobs, I think thousands actually. The Institute for Justice is the best source for this kind of work. They've got some reports on their website that you guys can consult, where they list in every single state all the professions that have these occupational licensing restrictions. So you want to, take a look at those kinds of restrictions, see what you can do to unwind many of them. You just want to do whatever you can do to put people in a position, like I said, to be successful when they come out from behind bars.
Now, and it gets weird, particularly with the cosmetology stuff. I know in Arizona there was a guy who was volunteering to cut hair for homeless people. He was a former homeless person. The cosmetology board opened an investigation on him, and it was going and going, and they were going to charge the guy until Governor Ducey caught wind of it. There was a big report on it, and he not only stopped the investigation, but also started opening up and looking at, are these state licensing boards actually serving public interest, or are they serving themselves? And I think you're starting to see a little bit of a trend here on how a lot of these things come into either into statute or regulation. It's very niche groups, and this is how this kind of plays out. And so for Shannon or Representative Kraus, if you want to kind of discuss some of the things that Texas has done in the re-entry area to try to kind of combat this and help people kind of get, on the right footing and, ensure that they're not committing other offenses. Either one.
Go on, then I'll go after you.
Sure, thank you. The collateral consequence issue is troublesome to a lot of prosecutors because it really has nothing to do with what happened in the courtroom. Once a person is sentenced and they complete their sentence and they are let go, criminal justice system is done with them. They have paid their, remember that saying, he's paid his debt to society? That doesn't exist anymore in the social media information age and the occupational license collateral consequence age. These things follow people forever. And it's not because of what happened in the criminal justice system, it's because the rest of society is holding it against them or using it as an easy, zero-tolerance way to narrow categories and things like that. And so it can be a problem, though, when people see the solution to that societal problem within the criminal justice system by wanting to come in and mandate, for instance, that a person's record gets expunged if they do X, Y, and Z. Well, that term means different things in different states. In Texas, it means the record is destroyed. No one can ever use it again. It's a crime to ever use it again because we've got to make everything a crime, right? And a person can swear under oath it never happened. So it's really almost a Soviet-style rewriting of history. The person can, and it's always been reserved in the past for destroying records for people who didn't do it, who got caught up in the system but shouldn't have. And were never convicted, the cases were not proceeded, weren't pursued, and so their records would be expunged. Now we have an increasing demand to expunge the records of people who did it. But in order to get them into treatment, rather than just doing a quick jail sentence and being back out, a lot of people want to take those records and prevent even the criminal justice system from having them, so that if that person comes back, we won't know that that person one county over already just went through a rehab program, et cetera, et cetera. And so there are some very good reentry options out there, more money in parole, intermediate sanction facilities when somebody screws up. Rather than revoking them and sending them to prison permanently, you just send them for a short period of time and then let them back out on parole, things like that. But it's very, prosecutors really like to try to educate the legislature to realize the unintended consequences of some of the reentry and rehabilitation things that they may think, well, that's going to fix the problem of society holding this against that person. Yes, that's true, but you're going to actually do more harm for people who come back into the system and get treated the same as every other first offender when it may be their fourth offense and they need to be treated differently. So those are the kind of things that prosecutors watch for, but by and large, I mean, we don't want new work. We want people to get rehabilitated and out. We don't need them to be repeat customers. We want the system to fix whatever it was that led them into it so that they don't come back.
Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Well, that's one thing I really appreciate about Texas since I've been in the legislature in 2013 is the dialogue between the prosecutors and the lawmakers. Sometimes we don't seek it out enough, but you don't want to have the unintended consequences. They always say you never tear down a fence till you know why it's there, right? And so many times, I know I've done it myself in the past, you get eager and excited about something, you want to just get it done, but you don't know all the unintended consequences. One of those to me, it was before my time, but the driver responsibility program. And I would love to see that go away because you're not being jailed. It's not an incarceration, but it is a criminal penalty that just weighs and weighs and weighs and weighs on you with all the fees and surcharges and everything. And so that's one area where it is meant to do a good thing and fund trauma centers, but it's actually been a huge burden on folks. And unfortunately, it's usually the people least equipped to pay those things too. So it's kind of a double whammy for these people. So then, as Vikrant was saying, if you got no money, you got nothing you can do. Sometimes you have to turn to a life of crime to pay off everything you need to, which starts the whole vicious cycle again. And so I think you're right. Reentry programs and how you rehabilitate is one of the key million-dollar questions in this entire venture, and we got to keep working until we even deferred adjudication. Sometimes we try to talk people into that, so things will go a little better. But then we treat them the same way as if they'd been in prison or committed those offenses when they come out. So we've got a lot of work to do, I think, on that reentry piece.
Briefly, yesterday morning, our state comptroller, Glenn Hager, did an interview with the Texas Tribune. All of you missed it because you were wisely at TPPF's policy orientation. But he did this interview with Evan Smith, and he said, reflecting on his time in the legislature, that he was deeply ashamed of his 2003 vote in favor of the driver responsibility program, and it was a program that really needed to go away. So maybe there's some movement for that out there.
And can I just say, someone who was there when that was passed, it was maybe the only time where prosecutors, criminal defense lawyers, there was a JP and another judge and a probation chief all said, don't do this, this is a mistake. But the legislature was in a huge, massive budget hole, and money is always going to, that's the one thing they have to do, right, is balance the budget. And so that bipartisanship, which you almost never see in the Capitol, was just plowed right over because of the money. And now we still have the same things. You mentioned deferred adjudication. One of the only offenses you can't get deferred adjudication for in Texas is DWI. You can get it for aggravated robbery, but you can't get it for DWI. And prosecutors have been trying, they would like that option, and defendants, many of them would like that option, but the thing that keeps killing it in part is the driver responsibility program, because we charge DWI offenders so much, $3,000 if you get convicted for DWI, up to $6,000 for a repeat offense. That is a huge part of the money that is collected, and so if you get deferred adjudication, you don't have to pay the surcharge. Well, that bill, a couple of sessions ago, had like a $50, $60 million fiscal cost to the state in lost collections. And so it wouldn't pass because legislators got to make that up somehow. So it just shows you the horrible ripple effect that something like that can have years after the fact that prevent otherwise people who could otherwise be rehabilitated and become contributing members of society from doing so because of the money.
That's right. Yeah, and something, Shannon, you've always discussed is there's some jurisdictions where the entire docket for a judge will just be suspended driver's license. And so do we want prosecutors, judges, criminal defense attorneys, public defenders wasting time on these for a docket, or actually looking and investigating on actual violent offenders, people that we want to? And I think we need to realize that there's limited resources for these things. And so how do we want to balance this? What do we want to make criminal? It's not like we just have an unlimited supply of prosecutors and investigation time and things like that. So you really need to think hard about resource allocation and things like that. So very interesting. Switching a little bit to kind of start bashing the administrative state again. Has anyone here ever tried to remove a tree from their home? Yeah. So if you try, there is about dozens and dozens of different ordinances and things that you have to comply with. A lot of the times you have to pay a ton of money. Sometimes you have to plant trees. There's a lot of different things, and it depends on the jurisdiction. But that's one of the ways that the administrative state can actually criminalize you on your own land. And Representative Krause, I know this is something that's near and dear to your heart. Somewhat of the kind of the overbloat of the administrative state in criminalizing, everyday activity, and then if you can kind of touch on that and some of the things that you've seen kind of from the administrative state.
Yeah, there's a bunch, and I think a lot of it stems from, as we were talking about right before we started, the Chevron decision years ago, and there was a decision up at the Supreme Court. Basically, Chevron, the Supreme Court justice said you got to give a lot of deference to the administrative state on these kinds of matters. Whenever they're making a decision, you have to give them deference because they know what they're doing. It's probably reasonable. So you just got to give those folks deference. Well, that's one of the things I'm most excited about with Neil Gorsuch and now Justice Kavanaugh. And if it sounds like we may be getting another Supreme Court justice fairly soon as well. But that their pushback on the Chevron deference. And so I don't know why we would ever give deference to unelected individuals over elected and held accountable individuals. And so I think we're going to actually see a lot of pushback on that Chevron deference doctrine in the coming years, maybe in the next just 2, 3, 4, 5 years, which then will greatly curtail the administrative state's ability to put in a lot of these onerous restrictions and regulations. And I think you'll actually start seeing a lot more of these decisions being repealed and pulled back and not allowed to happen because that deference is no longer there, and we'll have a greater say. The people will have a greater say in what's going on. And so if you live here locally in Austin, you have no problem probably articulating a handful of things that the government gets into. Rex Gore and I were talking about the paid sick leave and the prescriptive scheduling and a lot of those things that the entities the government tries to prescribe sometimes that they shouldn't be. But because of the new makeup of the court, I'm hoping that Chevron deference goes away and it actually frees us up to be a lot more innovative in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, there's a lot of times where the administrative agency will come after you and make you either pay a fine or force you to make some action, and then the criminal justice system can still criminalize your behavior. And so, Vikram, I know something that you worked on in Texas before you left, and a couple other states were safe harbor provisions, things that you pay your fine and you're able to kind of exhaust the remedy and kind of stop the criminal justice system from entering. So can you kind of talk about the importance of things like that and kind of combating overcriminalizing from the administrative state?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's incredibly important. You want, just as you put it, you want some sort of a safe harbor available to you so that you, if you've acknowledged the mistake and you can fix it very quickly, you don't get sucked into the criminal justice system. It just causes a lot more problems for your life and for the state than are necessary. But I really want to hammer down on this Chevron deference thing. I think it's incredibly important to think about Chevron deference in the context of criminal law. So basically, what we're talking about with Chevron deference, as Representative Krause said, is the question of how judges interpret kind of vague, ambiguous, difficult to comprehend laws. And the idea behind Chevron deference is they just go to the unelected bureaucrats and say, you make the call and we'll defer to you. I have a problem with that in a civil context I have a real problem with it in a criminal context where your life is on the line, your freedom is on the line, your ability to remain in the country is on the line. I'll give you a story, and I'm going to butcher the details of it because it's been a couple of years since I studied this case. There was a case out of the Sixth Circuit, and I think it's Esquivel, Quintana versus Sessions. And again, the details of this case are a little bit hazy to me, but essentially what had happened here was that you had an immigrant in the country. I think this man had a green card or something, and he committed statutory rape. There was a law on the books that said that he could be deported. He could be deported if he'd committed a violent crime. So you had an interesting question you had to answer. Was statutory rape a, quote, violent crime? Now, some people would say, yeah, I mean, rape is rape. That's a crime of violence. Some people would say statutory rape, while wrong, if it's a consensual act between two people, is not actually an act of violence. They're both reasonable positions. I don't have a position on this. I'd respect either side of it. That's not the point. The point is, who gets to make the final call? Some unelected bureaucrat at INS? Somebody who has no accountability to the people of the state whatsoever, who's not elected, who's not a judge, who, as I said, has no accountability whatsoever? Well, the court had a real problem with that. And those are the kinds of problems that you're dealing with in the criminal justice system when you decide to just defer the interpretation of criminal statutes to bureaucrats at agencies.
Well, and can I piggyback on that, Vikrant, because I'm familiar with that case, and my first thought was, why are the feds prosecuting a garden variety sexual assault case? That should be a state-level crime. We have created this massive federal criminal justice system that oftentimes overlaps what the states can do, and your local prosecutors get frustrated because if there is overlap between states, I saw somebody wrinkle her nose because her husband just went to work for the feds, so it's okay. But they oftentimes cherry pick the best, easiest cases that are, shooting fish in a barrel, and they leave the state prosecutors to handle the difficult, the nasty cases. And there is a role in our system for federal prosecution and federal criminal law, but it has drastically expanded beyond what I think it was originally intended to do. And so I put on my Federalist hat and I thought, why is the federal government prosecuting what is a garden variety, statutory rape case? And I think there was some child pornography in there too. It's like this could have easily been handled in Connecticut courts or wherever they were. And yet somehow, because somebody in the federal government, in the federal system decided we want to take this case, and oftentimes it's because they have stiffer mandatory minimum sentences. Sure. And so especially you see this in gun crimes and things like that, is these cases will all go federally because they know that they're going to get a mandatory minimum sentence, where in Texas they may be eligible for probation.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you. We're going to open it up to the audience right now. As you know, just raise your hand. Sir, I believe in the back you had your answer up. And for time, please make your question a question, and brief. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much. So 2013 session had great criminal reform with the Michael Morton Act, right? Everybody says, okay, bad judge, we're going to do something about Brady. And he was a judge at the time. Having practiced in that court, my question is this. I think, does it not, the problem goes deeper. If I were, and I'm an attorney, practice criminal law and civil law. If I were general counsel in the legal department for Dell Computers, and I got elected to the bench, and the very next day I'm elected, the plaintiff is Dell versus somebody, I've got to recuse myself. And I'm a human being subject to bias. But what we tolerate in the criminal justice system is I'm an assistant county attorney, assistant district attorney. I get elected to the bench, and the very next day, when I'm elected, is my former colleague representing the state of Texas, who I represented the day before, and there's no recusal. And as a human being, it's impossible to take off the bias from that hat. And you even saw, even in the civil side, Justice Willett, when he was on the Texas Supreme Court, recused himself decades later from AG cases, right? So why don't we have that like a cooling off period in the criminal justice system where it's not just dollars on the line, it's your life and your liberty to avoid prosecutorial bias when they get elected straight to the bench from the DA or CA office.
Who wants to take that layup?
Well, usually it's the judges who don't want the DA running at them for their job. That's one of the reasons why your district attorneys get the exact same salary as the district court judges, because the DAs used to get less, and it was an incentive to run against the judges. And so the judges said, yeah, let's bring the prosecutors in, and so that they no longer have that incentive. I mean, first of all, there are ethical rules that prevent a judge who has handled individually a particular case from sitting on that case. So just to be clear, if you're advocating for a rule that no one who has ever been a prosecutor can be a judge, you'd be elected president of the Criminal Defense Lawyers Association, probably. But it makes no sense to exclude people who are experts in a subject matter from sitting on the bench. And this is something that and I appreciate you recognizing that prosecutors can bring some expertise to the legislative process. We've seen this in attempts in this session and past sessions to exclude prosecutors from the legislative process. And to me, it's crazy to have the people who represent the state and who defend the laws that the legislature adopts from having a role in the process and trying to educate people doing it, because many of our lawmakers have no experience in criminal justice, and they get put on these committees for reasons that they don't always want, but they're there, and we task them with doing a job, and if they want to be conscientious about it, they need the input of not just prosecutors, but defense lawyers and other people in the system. Now, to come back to the election issue, I mean, look, should we even be electing judges? Okay? There are some serious downsides to electing judges, but if you're going to have elections, categorically excluding half the bar from running from that position seems to me like cutting off your nose to spite your face.
Thank you. You, madam.
Okay, so last session.
We'll get you, yeah.
So last session, the House actually voted 136 to 3 to decriminalize a toll violator. And what ended up happening was, in conference committee, because of some shenanigans there, they put the criminal penalty back in, and they actually redefined what a habitual toll violator was. Used to be you had to have 100 toll violations. Well, that's actually pretty easy to get, because all you need is a toll tag that doesn't operate for a month. And every time you go under a gantry, you're now a violator. Well, what ended up happening was they changed it from 100 violations to just being 30 days past due on a bill. It could be for a 25-cent toll. So we have a huge problem in this state. If you look at TxDOT, they have in just their 3 roads here in Austin have put over 2 million Texans in collections. That's greater than the population of the city of Austin. So we have a huge problem with this. I know we're going to have some bills on this. I want to know what you think as far as priority level, if we're going to see something really change on this issue this session.
Oh, that's a great question. If we've taken care of school finance and property tax, maybe. But it kind of goes back to what Shannon said. That is going to take up. There's obviously going to be things in the periphery, issues on the periphery, and I think toll roads is something that's actually animated constituents and legislators almost more than anything else the last couple sessions, as you know, as well as anybody else. So I do think we'll make some strides on that. As you said, in the House, it was overwhelming to make sure people were not. Yeah, that's exactly right. I didn't actually know those numbers. So I'd like to see something done on that front. I'm sure there will be some bills filed, as you said. But if you want to know if we're going to tackle criminal or school finance and property tax, absolutely. Anything else besides the budget, we'll see. So I think that's where we're at.
Yeah. You, sir, in the back.
States and even local municipalities are passing ban the box or fair chance hiring ordinances, ostensibly to help former offenders reintegrate. Would you share your opinion as to the efficacy and advisability of those kind of ordinances?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that, actually. So, these ban the box initiatives have a good motive behind them. You want to give people a fair chance to get hired again. This is something that we all talked about up here. And sometimes, you take a look at this notice that a person has a felony record, and you may just kind of go ahead and put that in the reject pile and go ahead and look at the other resumes. You can understand the human instinct to do that. And so you can understand why some people would say, let's just not even ask the question. I get that. It gets a little bit problematic whenever it's a government mandate. And I'll tell you why. There was a study came out of the Brookings Institution. It's absolutely fascinating. This study determined that whenever you mandate, ban the box, businesses don't just say, oh, okay, well, we don't care about it anymore. No, they still care about it. They're just going to try and figure out some other way to determine whether or not you might have a criminal record. Start doing some weird things. They start doing some ugly things. They maybe read the name at the top of the resume and they ask a question like, does this name sound black? Because a person who is African American is perhaps more likely to have a criminal record. It's an absurd way to start thinking about hiring, but this is what people are doing, and then what ends up happening is that fewer African Americans even get job interviews in the first place. I think it's a really, really fascinating experiment. It has to be replicated. It could have been a weird kind of one-off thing, but I can understand how something like that would have happened. And so here's what I would say about ban the box. I think it's a good idea, but I think it's a good idea when companies themselves initiate it, not whenever governments mandate it and say, here's what you must do. Because if the company initiates it on its own, it can make it a part of its culture. It can talk to its HR department and say, this is why we think this is important, this is why we ought to do it, this is how we want you to approach it. And you can have a real deep culture change. And culture change is more important than statutory and legislative change at the end of the day. So I like ban the box, but I like it whenever it's whenever free individuals get to freely choose it, not whenever government mandates it.
And there was a study by the University of Michigan that replicated what you found in the Brookings. And to give a quick plug to Koch Industries, they have had that culture change within their applications, where they're able to do it within themselves. And so I know the city of Austin recently passed a fair chance hiring ordinance, and I was down there trying to go against that Thunderdome of a testimony. That was a lot of fun. But anyway, who else has a question? You, sir.
TPPF and the Koch brothers in general, and throughout many of their groups, have helped lead on bail reform. You mentioned it very briefly, but I'd love to hear more about what those initiatives are being looked at on bail reform, and anyway, that.
Well, I can talk about the bill that was filed in the legislature last session that ended up passing the Senate but dying in the House Calendars Committee. It came from our judicial branch, actually, and it would have required the use of validated risk assessments in every case to determine if someone is a high risk or a low risk. Now, there's a big debate about whether those are effective or whether or not they have a disparate impact on certain communities. But then based on that, there were some defaults that a person would be released on a personal bond, which is basically you pay $20 and you get out, okay? And you're not really supervised. And the bail bond industry isn't so keen on that idea. So they had some problems with it, and ultimately I think they would brag that they killed that bill in the House. I can tell you that prosecutors had some concern about that initial version of the bill because as what I think is kind of a tip of the cap to the tough on crime folks or public safety concerns, they were going to change our law and even potentially have to change our Constitution to deny bail to certain people if they're found to be a high risk. And that's not something we do right now. We just give them very, very high, like millions of dollars. But they also have a right, if their case isn't processed in a certain amount of time, they have a right to have that amount lowered after 90 days or a certain amount of time. This would remove that and impose a hearing after arrest within about a week where a judge could hear the facts of the case, and if the judge decided this person was a high risk and it sounds like they committed the crime, they go into the hole until their case gets tried, which could be 3 years later. Now, prosecutors actually had objections to that because there is no way under current resources that prosecutors can start having pretrial hearings on all of these cases and bring victims and witnesses and cops down there and have these full-blown mini trials. And as a result, Senator Whitmire heard that testimony, that concern, and he took that part out of the bill, which they appreciated. But it did end up dying. I do expect the bail bond industry to continue to fight it. I can tell you our membership, they don't really care how you do it. They just want people to show up for court because it's important to victims in the system to have their day in court and see justice is done. And they just don't want people who are out committing new crimes while they're out. And if somebody can invent a better mousetrap for doing that, I think our members are all ears. There are just some concerns about if you're not going to have, in a way, the state's been doing it on the cheap. They've been getting supervision of people out and getting people to court by the private bail bond industry. It's one of those public-private partnerships that people are always talking about. We've had it in Texas for 150 years. But they take their piece, don't they? They take a bite from those offenders who have to pay to get out. And if you're going to remove the bail bondsman from that, you have to have somebody else who's going to make sure people get to court and aren't out there committing new crimes. And I don't know what that solution is, but it's, again, like you mentioned, Chesterton's fence rule. Before you repeal something, you got to realize why it was put in place to begin with.
And, there's simple things like text messages and things like that that really help with getting people back into court. How many people have missed a dentist appointment because their dentist didn't remind them to come to there? I mean, it happens in the criminal justice system,
Not
too.
Beto O'Rourke.
Yes. Oh, that's... I saw a very funny joke. He's like, let's just pray that Beto doesn't have to get a colonoscopy anytime soon. I think I saw a hand over here. Yes.
Okay. I'm Chris McDonald, 24-year veteran policeman. As you're talking about decriminalization of marijuana, I really don't have an issue on it. I've never used it. However, I can say that I've never had to fight a person on marijuana. I've had to fight a lot of people drunk on alcohol. But the last 4 shootings my squad has worked in the last 6 weeks have all been drug-related. So if you decriminalize marijuana, you're going to have a illicit distribution network that's going to have an increase in gang violence. So therefore, will you then seek to legalize the distribution network so that we're not fighting gang wars on the streets of marijuana distribution networks that are criminal gangs?
Yeah, the question is, are we going to legalize?
Legalize the distribution of it if you're going to decriminalize it.
I don't think that's on anybody's radar at this point, but you make a very interesting point. So to me, this is one of those areas we got to have a lot of debate and discussion, so we're heading in the right direction. I do think decriminalization is the right policy goal. We're going to have to figure out how to do that and not put you guys in more harm. So thank you for your service. We
and there was
appreciate it.
a great little 20-minute show on Rocky Mountain PBS last month about where they interviewed the governor and several people who proposed the recreational use there, who said, this isn't what I voted for, because now you have these huge multinational drug trafficking gangs coming into California where they can grow it. And Colorado made some mistakes in allowing people to have way too many plants and et cetera, and so it got naturally abused by the people who want to make money out of it. And so you have these suburban neighborhoods where the state and federal officials are coming in their SWAT units, taking down 7 houses because they're all grow houses right next to your parents who are out there sipping coffee. And it's all about the money. It's all about the money. But we're seeing in several states where they've decriminalized or legalized recreational use that they aren't really saving a lot of money because they're spending it all trying to stop the bad guys from growing it and selling it and force everybody to go to the taxed and much more expensive legal weed that has the government's stamp of approval. So in a way, they have just traded one problem for another. And where they see enforcement of possession that is still outside the law where it's allowed, you again still see, there's just a report in, I think in New York, where they've done some legalization and still minorities are disproportionately arrested and prosecuted for illegally using what would otherwise be legal marijuana because they didn't do it within the narrow confines of how it has been made legal. So one of the people say, we're going to get rid of black market, we're going to get rid of disparate impact. They're not. Nobody has who has legalized it. And that's why we like sitting back and watching all those other states try to figure that out. And then if they hit on something that works, I think that'll be when Texas should maybe take a serious look at it.
Yeah, and I was going to say the exact same thing on the laboratories of experiment. It's been a very positive thing for Texas in terms of criminal justice, show people how it's done. I think Texas would definitely be wise to learn try to figure out the consequences, the positives, the negatives of the states who have gone before us on this policy to see if that's what we want in Texas.
We have time for one quick question. Anyone else? You, sir, back there? You don't have to walk as far, Manfred.
Thank you all for your time and thoughts this morning. My question relates to rehabilitation and reentry, particularly referencing Vicron's 95% statistic. Thinking about programs like, Representative Krause mentioned Prison Fellowship, Bill Glass, Prison Entrepreneurship Program. What can and should the relationship between these private organizations and government look like?
That's a great question. Again, you want to learn lessons from the past and make sure you're doing it right. But I think you're seeing one thing that I've loved seeing as a folks in Texas and around the country is the focus on equipping these individuals about to come out of incarceration with the definable skill that they can go out and market themselves with. And so I think if you can have the private sector interact with those folks, I've talked to some folks who do some prison ministry, and it's not just the faith-based side of it, but it's also the hands-on, how can we help these people get jobs afterwards? And having the people from the private sector come into these jails and talk to them about the life they can have, how they can do it, the jobs that they need, and how to be successful has been it has had a huge impact on them, just on their psyche, their psychological impact. So I tend to think this is one area where the private sector can actually partner with our criminal justice system and have a huge impact. And I don't know if everybody, but I think a lot of us have seen on the faith-based side how it just has produced dividend after dividend, making sure these people have access to that. But now going into an industry, I think it's hugely beneficial, and I think we need to promote it.
And I know last session there was a bill, and I don't remember the number, but Goodwill Industries and other members of the Smart on Crime Coalition got a pilot program passed to help people coming out of the prisons learn a trade and help them re-enter. And we looked at it. Chairman Parker was kind enough to ask us to kind of look it over and make sure it didn't have any unintended consequences, and we don't think it did. But now I think the problem is it hasn't been adequately funded. It needs some seed money from the state, and it's trying to get that squeeze that blood from the stone can be difficult. And so you have what looks like on paper a great idea, but for lack of some financial support.
Please give a round of applause for our panelists.